Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Lorandom podcast at the end of the third quarter of 2025. I'm your host, Peter Baumann, the editor-in-chief at Lorandom, and today, very luckily, we are joined by the Funny Guys, the co-founder and CEO of Lorandom, and Conrad House, the collection lead at Lorandom. And today, we're going to look back at the third quarter, review it, think about what some of the big picture topics and items were. Also, we're going to talk about some of our favorites and what we were up to this quarter. Then at the very end, we'll kind of look ahead a bit. But yeah, there was a lot that happened this quarter. So we're going to talk about the rise of the digital scene at the Toledo Museum of Art, how Sasha Stiles debuted at MoMA, the restructuring at Christie's and their digital department, and then our very own The Funny Guys. We'll talk a bit about Raster and its relation to Lorandom. And then finally, we will talk about the rise of the Solana avant art scene, especially what's happening now on VVV. A lot to talk about, a lot to discuss, and we're very excited. So let's begin. I guess let's start with the big picture takeaways from this quarter. It felt like a lot was going on this quarter. One of the major developments, and this was due to the opening of Infinite Images at the Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo, Ohio. So I knew that was coming, so that wasn't a huge surprise. But I guess what's been more of a surprise was this continued programming around the digital, and it really seems like moving forward, it's going to be something that they're going to prioritize. That was maybe a bit that I didn't expect. I think that's one of the most interesting things that happened this quarter is that Toledo is now one of the major players, it seems, in the institutionalization and presentation of digital art. But yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see Toledo becoming such a kind of heavy-hitting figure. I think it's great to see like they're not just stopping at Infinite Images to some degree, but they're kind of adapting to the broader space and seeing other ways that they could fit in. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of us in this space feel that the space is underrepresented to some degree. So having anybody that's here to help push us along the stage and give us a bit more spotlight is always nice to have. And I think there was a lot of excitement about Infinite Images, and I think we even talked about it at the end of our Q2 review, a lot of like things that we were looking forward to. I mean, I think it lived up to a lot of the expectations that it had. It was great to see kind of the reception of it. It was great to see kind of Frieze and other larger publications write about the exhibition, and I think it gained a lot of praise for what it showed from kind of the connections of like our digital space to like the 1960s with their Albers and Max Bill pieces that they had included. But it's great. It's great to see them like kind of continue to push forward on this digital front. It's great to see that Toledo's kind of taking that effort to become one of the leading figures in it.
Yeah, and hopefully it's also the start of seeing more like physical installations for like this Web3 native generation of digital artists. Because I think a lot of them, like they have ideas for physical structures and projects like that. They typically don't have the resources, or they don't get the space, or they don't know how to reach like the audience in like physical spaces, like with these projects. And I think some artists in the exhibition really took good advantage of the opportunity. The one that really stood out to me was like Dev Beef, like his Glitchbox, right? Physical sculpture where people can like physically interact with the parameters. Like that looked fantastic. I'm really sad. I missed the exhibition. Like that would have been an amazing piece to interact with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about these institutions showing what their value can be, because sometimes they can be questioned in this space. You know, do we need them at all? And yeah, I do think that they're showing that they can be valuable with what they're doing in Toledo and what they're doing also at MoMA. And a lot of that is giving this digital scene, giving it a physical space, giving it a physical presence. That was something that I spoke to Sasha Stiles and Martha Joseph, the associate curator at the Department of Media and Performance at the MoMA. And it's something I spoke to them about in a piece at Lorandom. That was just about translating this concept of a living poem into an experience in a space. Sasha even said something talking about the work as this embodied performance that was immersive and also participatory. She said part of it is thinking about the wall and this amazing screen in the MoMA lobby as a performer itself and a next-gen poet that is here to retell this AI epic. Yeah, really incorporating the space into the telling of her story. It also allowed for them to add sound and a noise component. What's also interesting is that it doesn't really take away from the more ephemeral aspects of it, because you can also engage with this work on your browser too. But it still has this opportunity at the MoMA that will be engaging every visitor that walks by that lobby.
I mean, it's like it's the same line of thought with like Toledo. It's like it's really encouraging to see these larger institutions like put forward effort and what you said, Peter, like give actual physical space to these artists, and not and a lot of times like physical space, they're not all equal. I think obviously like when you look at things like the infamous Tezos poll compared to like a MoMA screen, like just because something gives it physical space doesn't mean it's done in the right way. But seeing MoMA do, I mean, obviously starting with Rafik and then moving to Raphael and then now Sasha, all three seem to be kind of executed really well, and the works that are within the space fit really well. And it's great to see the kind of the breadth of kind of work that they're showing. Like they're showing very easily appealable Rafik to some degree with like this very complex data cloud structured piece, and then you go to a very, I think, minimalist kind of opposite of Rafik's work with Raphael, with these kind of hard-edged geometrical compositions, and then you get to also highlight like another side of generative art, which is kind of this like text-based literature, which is really fascinating, and then also kind of highlighting more kind of AI or machine learning fields with Sasha as well.
It also feels to me like with all of these like North American museums that we discussed, like it's not like a one-off anymore. It's not like an experiment anymore. Like Ryan Zurer's on the boards at the MoMA. The Toledo Museum of Arts like has started its own like labs division to like encourage like experimentation and invite like digital artists for residencies. The LACMA also announced this like digital leaders program. These are all like structural changes. Like these are structures that will continue to be in place at least for years, maybe for decades. It's like a very different type of engagement than what it was in 2021 when NFTs and digital art were like this hot thing that they just wanted to like touch on for like the attention and stuff. So now it's really those like structural shifts have happened at these museums over the last years.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that presenting this work in a museum context allows is that it can have these conversations with the museum's collection. And when it's a place like the MoMA, then it's conversations with art history. And I mean, Sasha is doing exactly that. Like she told me about how the piece is in conversation with people like, Bruce Nauman and Barbara Kruger and Cy Twombly, and they all have significant work at MoMA. And like you mentioned, Conrad, it was this opportunity to also show that side of text-based generative art and the language art side of it. I think that it shows the maturity of the space and has definitely been a positive development. Well, I think if those are two positive institutional developments, maybe something, I don't know, this was divided the community in terms of how they've read these tea leaves of the Christie's digital art restructuring. Some people read it that now digital art not being separate and will be part of normal evening sales, that will be overall a positive thing. There will no longer be this artificial distinction between digital art and real art or whatever that is. And now it will all just be together, although that has been done before to, I guess, varying levels of success. But yeah, I guess, how did you all interpret that news? And what did you think of that conflicting signal in this quarter?
I don't know to what extent we should feel saddened or not about Christie's, like not paying attention to digital art. Like I feel like these type of auction houses, like it's always more like a lagging indicator of relevance. Like it's not like any predictor, or like they're late to the party. Like they come when things like already have a big market, like when they can make money. And like once that goes away, I guess it makes sense for them to like allocate less resources to the digital art sphere. For me, it doesn't interact at all like with the excitement around digital arts. If anything, I feel like it's sometimes more interesting when these auction houses are not there or not like in the news like every week with like digital art sales. And I feel like especially this quarter as well, like we have seen like a lot of like bottoms up movements with like new collections, new artists entering the space with prices that are like very affordable. And that always feels like an energizing moment where like real things are happening. Like a digital art sale at Christie's. I don't know like how big of a loss it really is for like the digital art space. But that's maybe from my perspective. I think from other people's perspectives, like it's really important that we get validation from institutions like Christie's, and it helps mature the space. And it's like a different side to the story. But I don't really mind that Christie's like shut down its a digital art department. But I also want to claim it's like a positive thing, to be clear.
I think what you kind of nailed on the head is like it depends on like it's a very personal thing of like whether you think it's good or bad, and it's like what Jan said, it's like a lot of validation. It's like you see like some artists that like joke like I would never want my work sold at Christie's or Sotheby's, and then some other artists love that and they love to even put it in like their bio, like artist that has been shown at Christie's auctions, sold at Sotheby's auctions. So it's a very personal thing where like some people feel very validated by being a part of these auction houses. Some people feel they want nothing to do with it. So it's very like a personal preference thing. And I almost agree with like Jan, like I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think if they really do plan on just like merging the digital with the real art auctions, or however you kind of what you said, Peter, like what even is that? What does that even mean? I don't think it's surprising, that's for sure, that this happened. I think just last year we saw Sotheby's kind of do this same thing when they laid off a handful of like their metaverse and digital art workers in 2024. Specifically, like the auction houses took one of their biggest hits in like 2023. And I think a lot of the time around like 2023 and even 2022 was this scramble to kind of like pick up on anything that could start generating more revenue. And as like these traditional markets collapse, we saw these things like Sotheby's really diving into the metaverse. We saw Christie's creating these digital auction things, and it was probably, I think, due to they're chasing the penny. They're trying to keep afloat, which you can't blame them for. But I think when we looked at like kind of traditional markets from 2024 to 2025, the decline hasn't been as much as it was from 2023 to 2024, where I believe from 2023 to 2024, they saw a 25% decline. Whereas from 2024 to 2025, we only saw, I believe it was about like a 2 to 3% decline. So it seems like the falling knife has stopped its speed a bit, and we're kind of hitting a bottom.
I do think in practice, it will probably mean that like only like a handful of like top digital artists that can sell for like big ticket prices like will still be featured at Christie's. Like we'll probably see more like Rafik Anadol's or like Beeple's like go through Christie's on their like Web3 platform. I think it was called Christie's 3.0, right? Their digital arm. I must say that they did a lot of pretty strong curations, and they did feature like a lot of emerging artists. Many of the prices were actually quite accessible, like sometimes like starting at like 0.5 ETH or 1 ETH. And for the random, like we actually collected some artworks there. We collected like a Mina Atairo piece at Christie's, and she's not like the artist you would expect at like a top auction house like already. She's like very much at the start of her career, I guess. They did do a good job with curation, and they did feature a lot of underrepresented voices in their curations, which will now probably not be the case anymore.
Yeah, I do want to, I think, just add on that too. It's like I was going to mention that same exact thing. I'm like Christie's did do a really good job, I think, even compared to the other big auction houses, at actually putting together really nice curations of new work, especially like work that's coming directly from artists. And I think this is partially probably due to Sebastian being such a big hand in it, but they put together a lot of great shows with a lot of great new work.
Yeah, I think that's where the cope went a little too far, that actually this is a good thing that happened. Like I think it's pretty clear when you hear what Sebastian Sanchez was saying, that it went from a team dedicated and working on this and thinking about this and presenting it and those resources, the resources of a team, to just me. When you think about it like that, I mean, it's a clear downgrade in terms of the resources that they're allocating. But that is an indication and a signal of a weaker art market, especially a secondary art market. But that doesn't say to me that there's any indication that what's happening in art is less interesting, or that it's an indication that the creativity is somehow filtering away. Yeah, again, I think it would be quite the opposite. Yeah, let's move on to the next item on, I think, one of the main and big picture takeaways from this quarter. Yeah, whether you're Lorandom or not, was the introduction to the space of raster. I wasn't surprised that it captured maybe so much mind share on Twitter for when it for maybe as much as it did, but I would say that I was a bit surprised at how many artists posted about it and said that they were emotional seeing all their work, and that genuinely did surprise me that it seemed to resonate with such a large number of people. But yeah, did you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, it was a big quarter for me, and yeah, for the entire random team, like with the launch of Raster. As you guys know, like it's something I've been talking about for years, like working on for like many months together with Michael, who is a developer, like the technical co-founder of Raster. And for all the time, I always had a feeling that it will probably resonate, that it hopefully solves like a real problem, not just like a problem that I made up in my own mind. But when it actually launched, it received like that type of reception from a lot of amazing artists, collectors, curators. Like it was really overwhelming. I was extremely happy to see that, and it definitely made it like all worth it. I think a part of it was we want to position Raster as like a new digital art marketplace. We want to make like the digital art market way more efficient than it currently is, and to do so, we knew we had to aggregate artist profiles. We have to bring like all their work together on one central profile. We did that mostly to improve the collector experience, so the collector doesn't have to jump from like one page to another to like find all the work. But it of course also solves like a big problem for artists. Like they all have to work with like link trees. They all have to really like onboard collectors in like a quite painful way when their work is like dispersed across so many platforms. And some of them, like who have the resources, like Xcopy, like they've created like a really beautiful portfolio website where you can find all the work. But most artists, they don't have the time, they don't have the resources to do that, to create this portfolio websites. And I guess Raster kind of does that for them at scale. It makes sense that they're really happy with Raster, but it's also something I didn't expect. Really grateful with the reception.
Yeah, I think just a big congratulations to the Funny Guys for getting this out there, because like he mentioned, this has been something he's thought about for years, and I'd kind of like tweeted it anecdotally, but like the first time we had ever met in person, we had like this discussion of like, hey, it would be cool to have some really good aggregator that didn't require you to go to Foundation, Super Rare, Objects, HickIckNuck, whatever it was at that time, FX Hash, Artblocks. You had to go through 20 different hoops just to get hopefully what you thought was a full encompassing view of like an artist's on-chain career. So like coming from a collector, it was something that I think we both had always like really wanted and dreamed of. And I think at the start of 2025, we started to see like a few platforms like kind of try to spearhead this initiative of like, let's get all of an artist's works into one place to explore it. But it still wasn't there. Like they're still missing, whether it was like cross-chain adaptability or even just the artist profiles weren't fully complete, and like they were missing certain projects or certain works, or they weren't kind of dividing it as nice as Raster does with, you can divide one of ones to long form editions, you can do series work. It's a really nice breakdown. You can see all activity on one page. Again, with what Peter said, I was also pretty surprised to see like how happy kind of artists were and the reception of artists in general, because being a collector, I was stuck in this collector mindset of like, oh yeah, I know why collectors would love this because of all these incredible things we just mentioned. But I never really thought about like why artists might like it, and what kind of the Funny Guys brings up with, yeah, like you go to an artist Twitter page and they have a link tree that has 20 different links attached to it with different project pages and different NFT websites that they have a work on or a project on, and it can become very convoluted for them. And like, again, they don't all have the time to set up a really neat artist website or even have the time to manage an artist website where they keep up with everything that they're doing. So the ability for them to kind of just be like, oh yeah, if a collector comes to me with interest in my work, I can just share my roster link, and this will kind of display everything that I've done in my on-chain career is really helpful to them. And I think, yeah, it takes away a lot of the unnecessary manual labor work that comes with being an artist and having to kind of represent yourself to some degree or present your work in a neat, organized fashion.
Yeah, you mentioned, Conrad, that like the ID like has been mentioned by like other platforms, and like we're not like the first to like mention this ID, like aggregating artist works. Like over the years when I thought about the ID, like I always had this feeling of like it's maybe like too simple, it's like too obvious. Like surely someone is like doing this right now, and by the time like we get started like working on it, like someone would have beat us like through the markets. But then the years went by and nobody really executed it well. Like the devil is really in the details and getting the system right, and it's not like not very easy to solve. And yeah, the only reason that we did end up, well, maybe not solving it, but making a good attempt at solving it, is because of Michael. Like Michael Elsdorfer, my co-founder, like he started Masterpiece.so in 2022 that got acquired by Kraken, and it solved like some similar issues. And I actually knew that he would be the person who can actually solve it, because a lot of other people I talked to, like they thought they would also be able to solve it. But with him, I actually knew like, yeah, he did it before. He has a system like in his mind to tackle this at scale. Has been a fun journey so far, but still a lot of issues and a lot of things to improve. So it will keep ourselves busy for a while.
Yeah, I think like Conrad said, it's one of my earliest also memories of talking to you, Jan, was you mentioning this idea. And so, yeah, I'm really proud that you were able to see it through, on top of doing, what you've done with the Random. So really proud of you, really proud of Michael too, and overall very impressed and happy for you guys and what you've contributed now to the space.
I appreciate it, guys. Like thank you so much for saying that. Maybe later in the call we can also talk about it like a little bit more, because one particular question that I've received a lot is like, how does this interfere with the Random? Is this like an entirely different business or not? And I would like to answer that question. We can talk about it like a little bit more later in this call.
Yeah, we'll bring up Raster a little bit later. One thing that we've talked about, this institutional changes that we've observed this quarter, the continued interest from MoMA, the rising interest from Toledo, the maybe waning interest at Christie's. One thing that we haven't talked much about is just the art that's being made right now. And I think one of the most interesting things that's happening this quarter, the art being made, is, I think, really exciting. That's one of the big picture takeaways of this quarter, which is not the rise of the Solana avant scene, but I guess certainly its entrance into more of mainstream prominence, or it's maybe slightly more and greater acceptance, especially with ETH collectors over the last few months. It's been a really exciting energy, and I think, Jan, you even alluded to it earlier with this exciting work that's at approachable prices. And there's this energy in the scene that I think, to us who are kind of veterans of a few years, it reminds us of some of the projects that really brought us into the space and really got us excited about everything that the space is and can be. And so I think that's also why it resonates maybe to us, or especially with me, is that it kind of reminds me of, my roots or a little. So what do you guys think about the this Solana avant scene that's gained traction, certainly you could say, this third quarter of 2025?
Yeah, I think you hit it pretty good on a lot of points, Peter. But yeah, like you're right. Like this, it's nothing specifically new because like Parker Ito and Remilia and Swag World, and Horses and Trifella, whatever, all these projects and Mons, they've been around for some time now. It's not like they just emerged this quarter, but you're starting to see like a lot more, I think, yeah, specifically like the ETH crowd and maybe even some of like the Tezos object crew start to like, I don't know, share it, collect it a lot more than usual. Usually it was just like this very like niche pocketed group of enjoyers of it. It was something that I was only familiar with through kind of adjacent talks that happen in like the Terraforms Discord and people like Matto, and people like Garden Party that on Twitter that had kind of showcased this a lot. And when I first came across it, it was very intriguing just visually to me. And like trying to understand like why it's so visually intriguing was kind of a journey in and of itself. And I think you mentioned it a bit, Peter, but like, yeah, it kind of reminds you of like the early roots of like why you got into NFTs or this digital art scene in some ways, and the relationship to like how it almost feels, or there's like some similarities to like the early Hickok Nunk stage, and kind of this, it's to some degree it's apples and oranges, but I think in another ways they're very comparable, because just like the energy that is felt within like this kind of new art movement or like experimental art movement, and not just that, but just also like this idea that like it's kind of stuck to Solana, which is kind of really interesting to me, because I think for a long time Solana was seen as like the meme NFT scene where like obviously nothing was taken too seriously there. Anything that was like serious art was seen as usually Ethereum and Object, whereas like Solana was very PFP oriented, very degenerate. So it's very cool to see like an actual like artistic rooted scene kind of emerging from Solana, and that they're sticking to Solana too. Like they're not, it's like the same way that like the early Hickok Nunk cool kids stuck with like Tezos as like this like part of like the personality trait. They're doing the same with like Solana, and kind of creating like this environment for themselves. And it's really fun, and I'd love to talk a bit more like on why we think it's so captivating. I think there's a lot of, I think Brian talked about it in that thread that I think we mentioned actually on our Q2 review of like the schizophrenic media thread of like why is this so intriguing. And he talks a lot about like Parker Ito's early career, and like how Parker's been doing this for a long time, and Parker's earliest paintings has a lot of like familiar like trait maxing compositions that you would associate to his current projects. But to me, I think the reason I find it so intriguing is like to some nature, it's like almost like comforting to the chronically online kids. And I think a lot of people in our space are like chronically online. So when you find work that is obviously referencing so many of these like online cultures and items and kind of niches that you're familiar with, the work resonates with you in a lot of different ways. And like it's so soaked in kind of ironic imagery and memes that there's so many layers to it. It's so meta, and it can be so much more intriguing than like a regular PFP project like CryptoPunks or something, where, oh yeah, I have a CryptoPunk with a beanie or a hoodie or a basic set of earrings, rather than, oh, I have a little Swag World that has a Vetamon's hoodie with a Chrome Hearts hat, and I have a bacon background, or like something that is just so out of this world, but you can almost relate to it a bit more because you're building like these connections to these cultural references that have impacted you in some ways. And it's really hard to put like it into words. It's just like sometimes you see in a painting that just emotionally provokes you. And I think this is kind of how the Solana Avant scene is like, it's unexplainable to the outside world, but hey, when you've been seeked in this space for so many years, it's hard to get something that kind of gets the motors running. And for me, this is something that gets the motors running again. So that's what makes it so enticing for me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that like I haven't been like as stepped in and following like as closely as you guys. So I'm mostly like learning about the scene from like having calls with you and like talking about it and like the stuff you guys share. But yeah, so I'm not like when people talk about Drifella and Mifella, they lose me along the way. But what I find interesting from like what I find interesting from, let's say, like a further distance, like from the scene, like generativity and NFTs, like has always been like a part of the story. Like even CryptoPunks are generative to some extent, with like these like traits combinations that are like algorithmically determined. We have like generative arts, art block stuff, which is mostly abstract art. The Solana Avant gay scene, or whatever the right name is, like it also plays around with generativity, but it's not like the typical like cartoons, like the Bored Apes and like that type of like generative NFT collections. It's also not these purely abstract generative art collections, but it's something in between and something that hasn't really been explored as much yet. And it really targets painting. It has like so many like art historical references about the tradition of painting. And that to me was like something, yeah, I've never seen before. And the way that also connects with internet culture, like it's definitely something very unique, like territory that nobody has explored over the last years. It has been fun following from a distance. Parker Ito's work, I think it's really, really incredible.
Just the fact that it has these two elements, it has the formal and figurative qualities, and then all these recognizable mimetic cultural touchstones that I think for people that have grown up with the internet over the last 20, 30 years, those things mean a lot, and it speaks that language, and it speaks it in a way that it's different. It's not better or worse, but it's different in a way that the purely abstract geometric work on, maybe not purely, but the vast majority of abstract geometric work on FX Hash and art blocks do. And maybe some people prefer, people prefer maybe the simplicity of pure geometric abstraction. What I really like about the Solana scene, and yeah, Conrad, you mentioned it too, is that it isn't new. Like, I remember about a year ago talking to 113 about Remilia and Milady, and it was kind of the first time that I had heard about it in a serious way. I'd heard about it before, and so I looked into it a bit more deeply, and at that time, about a year ago, and I remember being a little afraid, or I remember thinking, once you look into Remilia and Charlotte Fong, I remember thinking, oh dear, okay, well, that's that. And then also maybe around that time, I looked into the Solana meme coin trenches, and I was also similarly taken aback, maybe. And so putting those two things together, I think that maybe I unfairly lumped in the Solana art scene with the ETH and Milady scene, and then maybe with maybe the worst of the Solana meme coin trenches. But there's no question the art being done there by Parker, but also people like Biscuit, Tajiba, and Bosch is some of the most interesting work being done right now. I mean, Jared Badair called Jafela the most interesting painting conversation in the last 30 years. And this isn't somebody who I think says that flippantly. This is somebody that actually who knows a lot about the painting of the last 30 years, him and Parker. So I really think that what's happening with Jared and Worm and Parker and Biscuit and all these guys, VVV, is exciting to me and very refreshing. And one of the reasons that I think it's also interesting is that, again, like I think you can't help but compare it to some of those earlier movements that originally got us into this space. And yeah, I wonder from you guys, how do you think that this Solana Avant scene compares and contrasts to what is the best comparison? Is it FX Hash? Is it HickHickNunk? Is it Art Blocks? Maybe we can start there, and then how does it compare and contrast?
In a lot of ways, it's like apples to oranges, where like they're almost uncomparable, because like it's a whole new thing in and of itself. And like you said, like the roots from like the Remilia scene or like the Solana degen trenches scene, like the way that it emerged is like completely unique compared to maybe the way FX Hash or HickHickNunk kind of emerged. But I think mine is just, what I mentioned before is like, I think the thing that is so reminiscent is like this kind of hardcore nature to stick to Solana, and like this being like their home, and this is where like the Avant scene is happening, and anything remotely similar to like this kind of movement is all happening on Solana. Like we're not seeing it happen really on ETH that much, and we're not seeing it happen on Tezos that much. So I think that's what makes it so I think reminiscent of things like FX Hash and HickingNunk is like that it's created its own like home chain to some degree, and like it's really boosted that chain's art scene just because of this one movement. So the same way that like HickingNunk boosted the Tezos scene and FX Hash boosted the Tezos scene and Artblocks boosted the ETH scene. It's like it's kind of its own like homegrown, I think, unicorn to some degree. So I think that's where I see the most similarities.
What I think is the main difference is the people that it's attracted. So I think that the FX Hash and Artblocks crowd attracted artists, engineers, and engineers who were creative and experimentalists and wanted to then explore with the blockchain, but probably for the most part didn't have a huge background in something like traditional art history or painting, or even, I would say, contemporary art for the most part. But I would say that what this VVV scene in particular has brought is people with a painting background and people who love painting and people who understand painting and that composition. They brought that energy that's a different artistic energy than maybe what more of an engineer brings. And I don't know if it's cooler or it's I wouldn't say it's more authentic, but there's something about it that people who not only understand painting, but then can translate that, like Biscuit does with Drafella 2 and Drafella 3, into collections that both essentially have 10,000 pieces, is, I think, a real display of talent that, again, I haven't maybe necessarily seen. And I also think if you're not really familiar with the space, it's maybe easy to look at maybe one Drafella and dismiss it, or just the entire collection, or just the name. Oh, it sounds Drafella 2. What? So, but there's a 1, and what is Mafella, and what is Drillady? And like once you get bogged down and all that, it's easy to be like, I'm out. But if you stick with it, and if you can kind of try to meet it at its level, I think it's incredibly rich and rewarding and exciting. And yeah, like Jared said, most interesting painting conversation in the last 30 years with Drafella 2. I don't know enough about painting to make that statement, but it is, I think it's definitely some of the most interesting, like, generative coded work that's come out over the last few years.
Yeah, one thing that's also really interesting, I think, to see is that I think in general, like the Artblocks, FX Hash crowds, like a lot of people are, maybe it's because of the type of art, but it might also be because of the like Ethereum like infrastructure. But a lot of people are in their 30s, 40s. Like you're kind of an outlier if you're younger than 30, I would say. Like if you're 27, like you're like one of the young guys. But I believe Jared was saying that like a very large part of the user base is between the age of 16 and 23. And that to me was like mind-boggling. Like we don't really have like digital art collectors like that young, like anywhere else. Like also known, he get known, like people are typically quite a bit older. And I think there's like many different reasons for that. I think it's like the way that they embrace memes, like in these collections, but also the accessibility of the Solana network. Like they have really good like wallet providers, like Phantom, like transactions like are basically for free. A lot of these collections were distributed like almost for free or like for a few dollars. That's like the type of stuff that someone who's 16 can actually buy into with just a bit of pocket money. They can't afford like an Artblocks mint. Yeah, it's like a gas war where you need to have like hundreds of dollars just to have a shot at getting a piece.
Yeah, there's an honesty and an approachability to the work that's refreshing. It isn't being shilled by people that have been around, for years and are clearly just pumping their bags. It's people that like it because it's compelling work. And I can understand why young people like it too. Yeah, like you were saying, Jan, it speaks the language of the internet, but also it's honest, it's financially approachable, but it's got the sense of irony and deep cynicism of, I think, young people on the internet who look towards the future and don't really love it. And see and feel maybe the most alive online, and maybe it shouldn't feel that way. And so there's a lot of conflict in more ways than one in the work. It's called Poe's law, where you're not sure whether anything that you read online is ever sincere, or whether, there's a wink. And I think there's so much to that in this work. There's a cultural depth and a layer to it that I find difficult for abstract art to approach and to touch personally. We're all intrigued, certainly, to maybe different levels. It's caught our attention and a lot of people's attention. And that also brings us to maybe one of the other main themes of this quarter, which is a renewed sense of optimism, I think, in the space. And I think part of that has been, just number go up, basically. ETH and TES rallying against Bitcoin in the third quarter, almost 100%. I think ETH went from around 2000 something, to now over 4,000. That has helped sentiment. I mean, a lot of these assets are denominated in ETH. I think that helps sentiment more than the Bitcoin rise. I don't think it's surprising that it trailed the Bitcoin rise. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but the quarter has definitely been marked by, I think, some tailwinds in terms of the macro sentiment. Yeah, what do you guys think about the vibe, the feeling of this quarter?
Yeah, it's just like the fervor has been like reinvigorated as the number goes up, and like this is always to be expected. I mean, when everything is so tied to crypto fiat prices and people's emotions are so attached to it, like no matter how much they want to say it isn't or it is, it's a big part of the space, and the space is noticeably different when ETH is at 4K when it's compared to when it's at 1,500. You see many new faces that weren't there before that kind of reintroduce themselves and come back in, and interest in certain works goes up and down, and there's more life in the crowd, maybe not due to like the right reasons. Obviously, it's not just because, people are getting more interested because the art has gotten more interesting. It's, people have gotten more interested because the prices have gotten more interesting and the prices have gone up. So yeah, I mean, it's something that we've been through before. So there's not, I don't think, much to add to it. We've been through this roller coaster of lows and highs before. So it's to be expected. The more interesting thing is to see how kind of the crowd reacts after we go through another low after this high, is what I'll be kind of eyeing towards.
Yeah, to me, it felt like for some time there was some euphoria coming back, but then it like quite quickly like ebbed away as well. And right now, I don't know, it still feels a little bit calm, and there's not like that many like sales happening. There's some like pockets of like very high energy, like the Solana scene. Also the NFT strategy side of things, which started with like a punk strategy. Like that's taking a lot of liquidity away from NFTs. Of course, it flows back in other ways, but yeah, there's like millions in trading volume. Lots of NFT collectors who are like speculating on those fungible tokens right now. That can also have an impact. But yeah, overall, like at least neutral vibes, I guess. And maybe it's good that nobody is like euphoric at the moment.
Yeah, I agree that the markets aren't exactly scorching. If there is a renewed sense of optimism, although we don't necessarily all think that it's hugely optimistic, I do think that if you were to ask people in more traditional art spaces, what's the sentiment, there would be no talk of any optimism. It seems like the last few years have been tough for the traditional art market, and now 2025 seems to represent some kind of final capitulation and more of an acceptance, whereas before there was always a bit of a defensive tone about some of the negativity. And what we like to do on these calls is track that relationship between that traditional world and this, our space, the digital space, the digital stroke, Web3 space and ecosystem and its economy and its art. The last quarter, they were in unison, essentially, both down bad, basically. And it does seem like this quarter, what we can say is that with all these traditional galleries, closing. That includes spaces like Clearing and Venus over Manhattan. And with all those spaces closing, a big reason, there's been two reasons, I think. One, it's pretty simple, I think, in that respect, if you really look at it from a macro level, is that, yeah, they're getting crushed by high overhead from rent and fares, and then sales are too low to really make up for that. What I think is interesting is that if you kind of compare this quarter to last quarter, now it seems like the traditional market has fully capitulated with these gallery closings, whereas our space seems to, if not plateaued, at least stabilized and maybe even gone up a little bit. So I do think that that's interesting, that we are kind of tracking the sentiment of both of these spaces, and they were in unison, and now they do seem to have departed.
I mean, if you just look at like typical floor prices, USD prices of collections, they have gone up in the past quarter. But this is obviously due to a large part of ETH nearly doubling in price over the past time. So it's hard to make like a real comparison, because like sales really aren't happening that much. It's not like market volume has drastically increased at all on any platform or anything. I think it's more of like an acceptance side on the traditional art world, like we mentioned a bit earlier in the chat. Like they took the really hard cuts a few years back, whereas like this past year or 2 years hasn't seen as much as like a falling knife, whereas it's really just kind of stabled out into like this bottom down trend line of, wow, this is probably how it's going to be for the rest of the time. And I think that comes to kind of a mode of acceptance where they took this really huge cut a couple years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, with the markets coming down so wide in traditional markets, that they thought like, okay, well, maybe we'll see how these next couple of years play out. Maybe we can see a renewed interest in it. And I think now that these couple of years have played out since that big crash, and they are not seeing a big renewed interest in these traditional markets, that they're finally at the point where like, yeah, okay, we should just shut these traditional spaces down. Yeah, like you also kind of mentioned, Peter, but maybe try to explore lower overhead avenues of kind of presenting and selling art in different ways. But yeah, I do think there's a bit of a difference, whereas I think traditional art world right now is kind of in this acceptance low ebb phase right now, whereas like the NFT market is maybe just obviously not super euphoric, but I think we're in a bit of a happier state. But this could also just be due to like that ETH fiat price being so good, and that kind of almost maybe being a band-aid to make us feel good about the space that we're in, even though like market volumes in terms of USD isn't really anything to be smiling about.
I think also on the digital art sides, as you mentioned, like on the traditional art sides, like all these organizations, they have like huge overheads, and that's also what like kills them, I guess, when the market turns and goes down. I feel like in the digital art sides, like things are growing. There's like new entities that are being spun up, whether that's Mimi opening a new gallery, VVV.so are doing quite well, Heft Gallery New York. It's always like a very small group, like sometimes just one person, like maybe 3 people who are like super passionate, who really want to see digital art succeed, who bring these projects to life. I think in almost like every case, like they have to be like very resourceful, they have to be creative, like they don't have a lot of money. I think they also find like developers with a passion for digital art who want to create their vision while also like kind of accepting a pay cut. Like they could make more money if they just went into the corporate world. And that's also like a similar story actually for us with Raster. Like that has been like a 2-person build out. Like with only 1 person like in charge of the technical side of things. It's a new platform, but it's just 2 people who basically dedicated like a year of their life to this new project. It's not yet like there's like millions like flowing into like any of these entities, like mostly like bootstrapped adventures.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that what is happening in these success stories are still happening at quite a small scale. One argument I think in favor of some divergence, which I think would be a positive spin, because if they're both bad, well, that's not great. But one argument in terms of divergence, and yeah, you talked about it, Jan, with Mimi expanding to London and the seeming success of things like VVV and Heft, and I'd throw in the digital side, online spaces like Verse and Fellowship and Transient, Feral File. I'd say that One thing that makes me optimistic that not if I chose one of them that I would know that 100% that they will succeed, but what makes me optimistic more about the cohort in general is I think that they have fixed some structural issues that the traditional art world is still contending with and hasn't really shown signs that they're equipped to grapple with, at least in a timely manner. And we've talked about it a little bit already, but one of that is the crushing overhead that gallery spaces in London or New York or LA can be very expensive. And then they also spend tens of thousands of dollars going to fairs and just the economics doesn't seem to work. The ArtNet Intelligence Reports mid-year review came out and basically laid it out. Reporting was done talking to these galleries that have closed and they just laid out that the economics don't work. And one of the reasons too is that they can't make up for that crushing overhead with sales when right now we're in a bit of a declining market. They don't have that many sales, so there's more volatility there. Instead of relying on 1,000 small transactions, they're relying on maybe one large transaction. And so there's more variance. What happens if something happens to that one person, essentially? There's these fewer collectors, fewer transactions, high overheads. So those are issues that traditional galleries are going to have to solve. That's a puzzle that they've yet to show, really, except for maybe the largest ones that they can successfully solve. But it's something that I think that at least those places like VVV and Verse and Heft and Fellowship, they seem to have structurally realized that a better model is asset light. Like, I don't think many of them have a physical space. Heft does, but they also recently raised, so they're a bit capital rich right now. Places like Verse and Fellowship are more nimble and don't have necessarily a permanent space that they pay rent at. That combined with things like the ability to be geographically nimble, and then also they're not relying on just a few collectors, they're relying on a larger group of thousands of collectors, hundreds of collectors, even if each of those individually is paying a lot less. So that, I think that adds to their resiliency. I do think that those demonstrations that they've solved those structural issues is what gives them a bit of a leg up, and what makes me a bit optimistic that there is a little bit of good news and divergence there.
I do feel like a lot of the problems that you described, Peter, for like traditional art galleries, I feel like a lot of them also applied to like some NFT/digital art platforms, like who already shut down like over the last years, whether it's like Known Origin or Makerspace. There's like quite a few of those who got really bloated in like 21, 22, when price only went up and they hired like really big teams. I think it's probably a similar story in traditional art, right? Like there have been like periods where the market was like growing like a lot every year, and there was like some mania. These galleries like hired like teams that were just like too large to like survive a bear market. So I guess it's also like a cautionary tale for the new galleries, like for Hefts, Fellowship. Like I'm sure they will do really well. There will be like periods where demand is like really high and the revenue is like going up exponentially. Hopefully they don't overhire. Hopefully they don't become bloated, so they can survive a downturn, which will also definitely come.
I think things like resilience and adaptability are what is going to really be the deciding factor in terms of whether these galleries succeed. And that's another thing that makes me confident about these more digital native spaces, is they seem to already be demonstrating that resilience. We've talked a lot. We've been talking a lot about macro trends and themes, but now maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what Lorandom itself has been up to this quarter, what the three of us have been high level focusing on this quarter. How about we start with you, Conrad?
We talked about it a bit before, but I mean, with ETH drastically doubling basically in this quarter, the strategy for the collection changes pretty drastically. Like your buying power is obviously extremely diminished on the secondary market. That is kind of almost out the door at that point, and then you kind of have to hope for like these newer primary releases and these newer primary platforms being a bit kind of adapted to like that newer higher ETH price, and that they kind of reprice their primary releases. But I mean, to kind of just ignore these problems, one thing that we could do is just focus on commissions, and that's what we kind of did with the quarter, was really kind of hammer down on a couple of commissions that I think we'll talk about a bit later, but with Juan Rodriguez Garcia and Copper Gillith, kind of focusing on commissions directly with artists, so we kind of can ignore the financial obstacles that come with a rising fiat price and secondary markets, and trying to hunt for certain pieces on secondary markets or OTC deals, with kind of just working directly with artists and working with direct USD prices and avoiding kind of crypto prices becomes like a big part of the strategy, I think, when we see ETH at this level. So that was a big focus for, I think, the collection side of things this quarter. You don't want to go too crazy when ETH is at $4,600, obviously. So you have to be a bit more reserved. And I think that kind of comes with just doing commissions. It allows us to slow down. It allows us to talk to artists a bit more, which is always a good thing. That was a big focus. And I think we'll expand a bit more on those commissions a bit later when we talk about kind of our favorite acquisitions of this quarter.
Yeah, that's really interesting about how the prices impact the way that you think about collecting. And then, yeah, Jan, did you also want to tell us more about your work with Raster this quarter?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for maybe some background context, because I'm not sure like all our listeners know about this. Lorandom was started in 2022. The NFT market was still like relatively hot. We found like a group of investors who like wanted to support us, like get behind this mission of like building a digitally native generative art institution. So yeah, we raised money, we started building out the collection, we started creating a lot of high quality content, we started building out the brands. But in 2022, we probably would have expected like the markets to be stronger by the end of 2025. So along the way, like we started to think about ways that we can like make Lorandom basically more resilient. Like what does like a self-sustaining future for Lorandom look like? How can we make sure we're not like fully reliant on like new investor inflows? How can we make sure we don't have to like sell off the collection as soon as the market is not as positive for an extended period of time? And that's how the idea of Raster like came into the picture. Like the long-term vision for like Lorandom and Raster is that both entities exist next to each other, with Lorandom being the largest shareholder of Raster. Hopefully Raster can do well, can make digital art more accessible, can become like a new base layer for digital art, where new collectors are onboarded and can start collecting digital art with relatively low friction. And if we succeed in that mission, Raster should become a profitable business that over time can maybe even issue dividends to its shareholders. And that would be Lorandom. That's how Lorandom can hopefully stay alive for like decades to come. And we can really like see through this vision of building like a digitally native generative art institution. Yeah, that's just some clarification I wanted to provide, because a lot of people are a little bit confused. Like there's Raster, but there's also Lorandom. Like how do these two go together? Yeah, they're basically separate entities, but super tightly aligned, with Lorandom being the largest shareholder in Raster. And there's a lot of like beautiful synergies, I think, between the two entities. Like if Raster can make digital art more accessible, like that's obviously also going to have a positive effect on how Lorandom is perceived and how well our collection does and things like that. Really excited that like we managed to launch Raster, and now hopefully over the next months and years, we can really build towards this future of having like two successful entities that feed off each other for a very long time to come.
Yeah, there are definitely these synergies, and I think those include things like onboarding and thinking about how we can grow the space and just make the space more approachable to everybody, and that includes newcomers. That will trickle down to newcomers. And yeah, I also get asked, I'm sure you do, Conrad, are you involved with Raster, or what are you doing with Raster, assuming that we are? Yeah, I think that's part of what we're doing now, is clarifying that you've been busy at Lorandom with the collection, Jan has been busy at Raster, and then I have been also busy at Lorandom. And so, yeah, the editorial focus for this quarter really on a critical approach to AI and looking at it in a way that was multifaceted, was not just thinking about it as a cheerleader, but looking at it from different critical perspectives. One of those was Hida Sherrill. So really honored to have her voice on Laurentum and to be able to talk to her. She's been for years and decades one of the most prominent figures in the contemporary art world. And so to have her perspective and learn from her was really invaluable. But it wasn't just Hida. We also had pieces by Brian Dracor, Kevin Buist, Luba Elliott. I interviewed Sarah Mayojas, really an OG GAN artist from 2016. Minea Tairu, one of my favorite and one of the most prominent artists who happens to include text-to-image and generative modeling in their more varied practice. And then, of course, really interesting this quarter was Laurentum's 100th article, which was a nice little milestone. And we had a little celebration by Yasha Reichardt, genuinely who I could say is my hero and the person I look up to the most. Her writing our 100th piece really meant a lot to me, and we'll always be grateful. And I'm just proud that that will be part of Laurentum's history, and it means a lot. Well, we had a busy quarter. The space had a busy quarter, and maybe now we can think more, less macro, and now a bit more micro in terms of the specific things that we liked this quarter. And maybe we can start with the group exhibitions or the group releases of the year. So that could be a museum or a gallery group exhibition, or it could be some kind of commercial group release. But yeah, what were your favorite group exhibitions or releases of the year? How about you, Conrad?
I guess I'll touch on one that is a bit more digital and then one that's a bit more physical for group exhibitions. But for digital, it would be the Net Evil exhibition that occurred on Feral File that was curated by Mackenzie Davenport and featured artists like Maya Man, Lorna Mills, and Hirsch, Dada Bots, and others. It was kind of this invitation of 7 artists that got kind of assigned to one of the 7 deadly sins. And then they created a piece that kind of explored the way that sin was kind of expanded on through like a specific internet online lens. So it's really fascinating to see. I think, for example, like Maya Man had Envy, and her piece is kind of revolved around this influencer scandal where these 2 influencers had a lawsuit where one was accusing the other of like ripping them off and ripping off like their brand, kind of explore the side of like envy that occurs with these online social media presences and influences in the world. And it was just a really fascinating show. I love a lot what Mackenzie puts out there and obviously what Feral File puts out there. So seeing them kind of work together and release Net Evil is really fascinating. And I loved a lot of the work that was in there. And I loved the curatorial note and kind of theme of exploring these deadly sins and how they kind of express themselves through this online culture that we all grew up in. And then for the non-digital side of things, this is obviously going to kind of touch on what we talked about with the Solana scene a lot, is the Yetcha Lang gallery show. One of Us is Real and It's Not You, which is, I think, actually still ongoing. Just one of their, I think, last few days is opening. But very great exhibition. The space looks lovely. They have the Mons chessboards laid out. They have the Dryfella triptychs on the wall. Really fascinating show. It's really incredible to see that gallery in and of itself emerging to really represent this scene that we've been talking about a lot earlier in the show. But I think those are the 2 that have really stood out to me. One on the digital side, one on the more physical side.
So I didn't know you were going to say the Yetcha Lang show, but yeah, that was one of mine too. It was Super Metal Bosch and Evil Biscuit. So it was this small group show with those 2. One of the reasons why I liked it so much is because it has work from the Dryfella series and also Dryfella 3, which, spoiler, I'll be talking about a little bit later. But the other exhibition that I was going to talk about and highlight from this quarter, do we really need to, bring it up again? But it's Infinite Images. I think it was one of those significant moments that, it's going to be in the timeline. It's going to be something that we look back at the end of the year talk and we think, okay, what were the big moments of this year? Infinite Images is definitely going to be at the top or one of the top. I think it's worth mentioning it brought a lot of people and artists from our space and brought some attention to them in a museum context that hasn't historically focused on the digital. At Laurandom, we covered it from every angle. We spoke with the curator, Julia Kagansky. We had a talk with several of the exhibiting artists, including Sophia Crespo and Tyler Hobbs and Eric Calderon. And we also had written pieces with Sarah Mayojas and Depp Beef. And then we had Kevin Buist review the show. So we took it seriously, and it deserved to be taken seriously. And it was definitely one of the highlights of the quarter and the year. So those were the group exhibitions and the group shows. What about the solo exhibition, solo work of the year that we like? How about, Jan, do you want to tell us your favorite?
Yeah, sure. Like on the personal collecting sites, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but like this quarter, like I've also collected like quite a bit of like figurative works. There's like one artist called Yuri_JJJ, whose work I like really love. It's like at the intersection of figurative work, like similar to like David Hockney's, but also digital textures, like pixel works by Travis Smalley. And yeah, it really resonates with me. In that light, like I did visit the David Hockney exhibition in Paris this quarter as well. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it, but it's probably like one of the like most comprehensive exhibitions like of his work, like from the early days in Yorkshire, like when he was still at art school, like his work, like when he was like living in LA, his iPad drawings, like everything was basically there. I do really like his work. Like I find it very joyful and makes me happy to like go visit a David Hockney exhibition. And it's in line with this other scene of like digitally native figurative artists, people like Yuri, RJ. I think it's a scene that's like mostly active on Tezos. But they've also received like quite a bit of love over the last months. And yeah, it's work that like really resonates with me personally. Just last weekend, I was at Fellowship for a dinner with Kim Eisendorf. You can't really call it that an exhibition, but it was like basically in a like Studio 137, his house/gallery in London. There's like a few like dinner tables, a lot of like Kim Eisendorf collectors like came to London. And they also installed like a enormous like LED screen in the same room. Kim was there as well. They showed like a lot of monogrids on the screen, pixel decks. He also showed like some of his work that he's currently working on, that may be released in the near future. And that was just a really, really awesome experience. And I guess it wasn't some type of exhibition, but very informal one. It was awesome to hear Kim talk about the work and yeah, how he sees his work and like the breakthrough that monogrids was. I really got a lot of context on his practice from that night.
Yeah, amazing. I think probably if you're going to talk about artists who really broke through this quarter, Kim would be up there. And one thing I wanted to mention too that we didn't say about the exhibition side is that Ars Electronica and SIGGRAPH both happened this quarter, and they both had several really interesting non-commercial digital art exhibitions. I guess from my solo work that I wanted to highlight, I've said the word already. It's confusing, but it's Drafella 3. So it came out, I think, in September. Yeah, I missed the mint. I was not quite tuned in to mint it or anything. And it kind of took me a couple weeks before I sunk my teeth into it. I looked into Drafella 1 and 2 a lot more first. But then when I finally did look at Drafella 3, yeah, genuinely, I was blown away. They follow the style that you mentioned earlier, Conrad, that Brian spoke about and did a thread about, called schizo collage. It's also known as trait maxing. What I think is really interesting about the work, it has this trait maxing itself is this aesthetic. Hyper collage is another thing that Evil Biscuit themselves refers to it as. It's a way to compose. It's a way to literally paint. I mean, if you look at Drafella 3, they're all triptychs. So that adds to their complexity right away. You're looking at 3 images, and it's not just one in isolation. It's how they all relate to each other and how they look next to each other. They look like paintings. They look like paintings that would be hung in a contemporary gallery space. with little things, strewn on the floor. They have the aesthetic sensitivity of somebody who is, I think, deeply attuned to the language of painting and its aesthetic. And I think one of the reasons why I really like that Yeche Lang exhibition that Conrad mentioned is that was a way to also bring those pieces to life in that space in New York. And so some of the more special Drefella 3s actually were presented in physical form in the gallery. I think Drefella 3, the fact that it also had this physical component, the fact that it was the culmination of this series, it was in conversation with Drefella 2 that we've already talked about, is this really revered project in the space. Drefella 3 took those aesthetic concerns really to this extreme that I found really visually compelling, especially once I sunk my teeth into it. I kind of going through that progression of understanding it from Drefella 1 to Drefella 2 first, and really blew me away. I think it is incredibly strong work. I guess that also brings us to the artist who stood out this quarter for us. And yeah, we mentioned SIGGRAPH and the fact that Frieder Naka won the 2025 SIGGRAPH Distinguished Artist Award for Lifetime Achievement. That was really special because I was on the jury for that and helped select him. So obviously Frieder is abundantly deserving, and Conrad, thank you for pointing him out. And then, yeah, Conrad, how about you? Who were the artists that stood out for you this quarter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nothing that we haven't talked on already, but a lot of like the Solana artists have been really great to see like how they've progressed this quarter. Again, it's nothing new. They've had to work out for more than this quarter, but it's really interesting to see them getting more recognition, whether that's Bosch, Parker, Biscuit, or Toji. Like it's they've really stood out. It's really interesting to see how their space is growing and how they're adapting to it. Frieder Naka, of course, again, he didn't really create any new work this quarter that we're familiar with, but just the fact that he won that SIGGRAPH award, I think, is a standout thing and should be kind of praised a bit. Yeah, I think, again, Armband and Dorpel, obviously, I think, was a bit of a standout with Quantizer, and then Copper Gillis, which we'll, I think, talk about a bit more with our favorite acquisitions. But those are the few artists that I think have stuck in my mind throughout this quarter.
I would just add, Sasha, the fact that she premiered a living poem at MoMA. I think it's a really significant moment for not only her, but for this entire space. In terms of acquisitions, what were the acquisitions that stood out specifically to you this quarter, Conrad?
It would have to be the Juan RG or Juan Rodriguez Garcia commission that we were able to finalize this quarter. This was a commission that took nearly a year in creation. We initially came to Juan with the idea of wanting to commission a real-time software work that explored the figurative kind of body atomical nature or theme that he had been exploring for a long time now. And I think every commission, every artist we collect is always so rewarding. But I think Juan just personally was a bit different. Juan was somebody that like I had really grown attuned to when I was first collecting personally in the NFT space and like his early object mints and just trying to familiarize myself more with generative art. And Juan being kind of a figure that had these daily shares that I'd always look forward to and somebody that I had grown kind of an affinity for as an artist and always look up to. So being able to commission, I think this, at least to me, seems like a very kind of pinnacle piece of work in his career as like a one-of-one unique long-form software piece that really kind of encapsulates all of his architectural anatomical inspirations into one conceptual piece too, of like the inhabiting the moment, where it's just this real-time animation piece that quickly moves through these compositions, and it forces the viewer to really sit and embrace these changes. It's really fascinating. And then just hearing him talk about the work with Sofia Garcia, who we were able to read an interview with, was really fascinating, and hearing kind of how he feels about the work, how he wants others to feel about the work, where his inspiration comes from, really stood out and was by far, I think, the favorite acquisition for this quarter for me.
I was going to say the same name, Conrad, like Juan RG, like the commission we did from him. Yes, definitely also up there for me. Some other really exciting acquisitions are also Quantizer by Harm van den Dorpel. I have to say, like, as well as like EDG, like his series Zero Broken Symmetry, both of these were adverse. So I guess I have to give it to Verse. Like, they knocked it out of the park with both of these releases. I feel like they're both part of this theme of also like artificial intelligence, artificial life, but not in the like very big data neural network type of way. But these like in EDG's case, like these like emergent systems where it can create lifelike structures with like very limited amount of codes. Harvin Dorpel with his genetic algorithms. I just think in general that this type of work is often like a little bit maybe like underappreciated. They're some of my favorite acquisitions of this quarter. I think both releases were incredibly strong.
Yeah, would echo that. And then I would also add Copper Gillith and that commission to the favorites. Yeah, we mentioned her earlier, but she's another hero of mine. She is really this seminal figure in the history of digital art with what she did both as an artist and maybe the first video game artist, and what she did organizing those SIGGRAPH computer art shows that were really important. And then what she's done as an educator and what she's done as a feminist video artist. I just think she's really underappreciated. So well done on us for supporting her and acquiring her work. And then maybe we'll wrap up with two things. One, a couple of pieces of what content excited us this quarter, and then one quick look at what's coming up for us this quarter. For me, I think I already said the content that really stood out for me. That was that 100th article by Yasha Reichart, the myth, the legend, the cybernetic serendipity from 1968 curator, the scholar. Yeah, again, like I said, my genuine hero. That was the piece for me. What about you, Conrad? What content stood out for you this quarter?
Yeah, mine is, again, we touched on it a bit before, but the DefBeef article that we released during the kind of the Infinite Images ongoing excitement, but DefBeef on the vernacular in a standardized age, where he kind of talks about the physicality of his piece specifically in the Toledo Museum. And I think a lot of this chat we've talked about, I mean, just in regards like the Solanus lane, but like the chronically online nature of the space we live in, and like the almost forced nature of us like wanting to keep pushing every part of our life into like this digital space. But it was nice to read like this DefBeef article where he kind of takes a step back, where he talks about the electricity and the iron, and he likes the feel of it, he likes the smell of it, he likes the way that it working with these physical kind of materials changes his psychological way, and how he like wakes up thinking in different ways. And I don't know, it was a really fascinating piece. And again, I think also the funny guys kind of mentioned it, but it was one of his favorite pieces of the Toledo show. And I would also kind of resonate the same thing with the Glitchbox physical installation being incredible, and like the ways that he created like the own fine-tune board where you can adjust the parameters, and seeing videos of like young kids, this really barbaric iron machine, like messing around with it and seeing like their enjoyment was really fascinating. And that article was really great. I think DefBeef is just always fascinating to hear from. So anything from him is always going to be at the top of my list.
Yeah, I'm going to highlight the interview you did, Peter, with Minna Atairu. I feel like in general, like her practice is super interesting. Like she uses AI in a quite unique way. Like there's not that many artists who are like using AI as a tool for activism, as you described, like in the article. Yeah, she definitely has more of like a critical lens of the technology. She like investigates the biases, like racial, cultural biases. Besides her work with the braids, which I think you talk about quite a bit in the article, like she has created like quite a few like very interesting AI collections. I remember like her project with the Benin bronzes, for which she won the Global South Lumen Prize like a few years ago. Thought it was like a really interesting way to use AI to basically reconstruct like lost like artistic heritage of a region. There was also her early work that she minted on Foundation, where she had created like this custom trained AI model using like makeup editorials from Instagram, which I thought was like really terrific. And yeah, I think the article, the interview that you did with her was like a really good insight into the way she thinks about her practice. And it's quite rare. Like she's not that like widely featured. Like she doesn't talk that much like in depth about her practice. So I'm really happy that we got to give her the opportunity to talk about her practice to our audience.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words. She's someone top of mind when I think of people that are really using some of those generative models in a compelling way that often gets flattened and overlooked. And well, we've been talking for a lot. but I guess it was a busy quarter, and we can talk about maybe what we're looking forward to coming up in just, the last minute or two. The main thing for Lerandom would be, I think, in terms of physical appearance and where we'll be supporting something in person, is FemGen 4 in Paris during Art Basel, and it is October 21st. We're supporting it. There's a really great list of contemporary artists involved: Gretchen Andrew, Armine Bardan, Saika Ihara, Jake Elwes, and then we have Topper Gillith, who we've mentioned. She will also be there on a panel. And so, yeah, we're really excited about FemGen 4. And then just for the rest of the year, for me, on the editorial side, I'm really excited about sinking my teeth more into that Solana Avant scene from an editorial perspective. So there's going to be, it's coming. And then I'm also looking forward to our London Art Guide that's going to coincide with Frieze London. Also kind of keeping my eye on that NeurIPS conference in December. But it'll be a big fourth quarter undoubtedly too. But what are you guys looking forward to?
For me, it's also FemGen, Peter. I'm really excited for that. I think Art Basel Paris is gonna be a great one. Not only for FemGen at Artverse, but I think the generative art crew in France is also going to do something really interesting with William Mapan, Florian Zumberen, a few others. So yeah, I'm quite excited for that week. It's a good reminder that I need to book my accommodation and my train tickets.
Yeah, I think more on like the artwork side, I'm really excited for a collection that is actually releasing today or tomorrow as the time of recording, which is Rifts by Hash Runner, which is kind of a new protocol-based art series where he's basically decompiling/compiling Solidity code into these bytecode compositions of different kind of ASCII forms, which is really wonderful. I think in previous quarter talks, we've talked about protocol art a bit more and our kind of excitement for it to see people dive into it a bit more. So again, I still think it's a very unexplored kind of region of this digital art space that we're in, and people really taking the time to work with the literal contracts that they have at their hands to create new interactive protocol art. So this is really exciting. The pieces that we've already seen kind of emerging look really great, and just cool, very conceptual project by Hash Runner. And then in terms of kind of exhibitions I'm looking forward to is the Gisson and Vanetti Bare Systems exhibition that is going to be happening at the MUD Shanghai, which is curated by Mimi, actually. Again, I love that duo. I love whatever they create. So I'm sure whatever they come out with in Shanghai is going to be incredible, and look forward to seeing kind of pictures that arise from that event.
Yeah, amazing. I think the fourth quarter of 2025 and Marfa, Miami, Basel, there's always stuff to look forward to. Big events. Well, guys, quarter three was big. It was a lot to digest, but I always enjoy doing it with you guys, with a sounding board, and to bounce some of these ideas off. So yeah, thank you all very much. And yeah, thank everybody for listening. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks,
Peter.
everybody. Thank you for hosting us. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.